Hey guys, and welcome back to Daily Kaylee's 13 Days of Halloween. I hope you all have been enjoying the episodes this past week. I've had a lot of fun this year, and last year too, but I've had a lot of fun coming up with this year's theme, and today's episode is one of the worst cases I've probably ever talked about on this show. It is about the murder of Sylvia Likens. And I had never heard of this until I was doing research and coming up with a topic for this year's theme. And when I saw this case, I could not believe what I was reading. Sylvia was born on January 13th, 1949, and she died on October 26th, 1965, at just 16 years old. She was put in the care of a woman named Gertrude Baniszewski. I'm going to pronounce it that way. I don't know if that's how you're supposed to pronounce it. But she was put in her care along with her younger sister. And it's because her parents worked for the carnival and they traveled a lot. So he needed someone to look after the girls while they were in school. Before I get into what happened to Sylvia, I'm going to talk about her background and then Gertrude's background, the woman who was supposed to be taking care of her. So, Sylvia's younger sister and herself were the ones that stayed with Gertrude, but she was actually the third of 5 children, so there were 5 total siblings. The other 2 siblings, the other 4 siblings, there were 2 sets of twins. When she was young, her younger sister Jenny, who was 1 year younger than her, had polio, and it caused one of her legs to be weaker than the other, so she had to wear a brace for the rest of her life. Sylvia was very close to Jenny, I think because she kind of thought that she needed to take care of her because of her illness. Now, the reason that only Sylvia and Jenny were the ones in Gertrude's care is because her parents had a very unstable marriage. They worked at the carnival. They obviously moved around a lot to travel with the carnival, and they had severe financial problems. Jenny and Sylvia were the 2 girls in the family, and there were 2 sons, Benny and Daniel. They traveled with their parents, but Jenny and Sylvia, because they were seen as weak and fragile because they were girls, they had to stay behind. They usually stayed with their grandmother, but she began to get too old to handle the girls. I'm sure you understand what I'm saying. Now, Gertrude. She also had a lot of siblings. She was the third of 6 children. And growing up, she had a pretty average American family life, but she watched her father die from a heart attack when she was in high school. She ended up dropping out of high school at 16 to marry an older boy. He was graduated. He was 18, she was 16. His name was Stefan Baniszewski, and he was very abusive to her. They stayed together for 10 years before they got divorced, which is insane to me, but it was a different time, I guess. This was her first divorce. She had numerous divorces, which for this time was very strange. It was very unusual for a woman to go through not only one divorce in the 50s, but multiple. Anyways, after she divorced Stefan, she married a man named Edward Guthrie. They were only married for 3 months before they divorced. Now, back to what I was saying about her numerous divorces. Shortly after this 3-month marriage, she remarries her first husband, Stefan. And they have 6 children. They ended up divorcing again in 1963. And once again, very shortly after this now 3rd divorce, she gets into a relationship with a 22-year-old man named Dennis Lee Wright, who was also abusive. She gives him another child, who was Dennis Lee Wright Jr., shocker, and shortly after the son is born, his dad just abandons Gertrude and their son. She ends up taking him to court for child support, and she wins her case, but this was the 60s, so there was no such thing as you pay, or the court pays you, and then he has to pay it back. He had to pay her every month, and he did not have a job, so it was very unlikely that he would have been able to pay her to take care of their son. So, in 1965, Gertrude lived completely alone and single with 7 children. Her oldest daughter was named Paula. She was 17 from her first marriage. Then she had Stephanie, who was 15, John, who was 12, Marie, who was 11, Shirley, who was 10, James, who was 8, and then baby Dennis, who was 1. She had a lot of kids to take care of, and like I said, her child support case was kind of like a joke in the court system. So she did odd jobs for her neighbors and friends just to earn money. She would clean their house, she would repair clothing for them, anything she could to get by. In July of 1965, this is when Sylvia's father, Lester, arranged for Gertrude to take care of the kids while he was traveling for work. Apparently, the way that he met Gertrude was because when his children started high school in town, Sylvia and Jenny, they became friends with Gertrude's oldest daughters, Paula and Stephanie. Now, the agreement that Lester made with Gertrude was that she was to take care of the kids and he would pay her $20 a week. She told Lester that she would care for Sylvia and Jenny until he came back, as if they were her own children, which she had 7 of, so it should have been pretty easy. So, not long after July 4th, oh my god, my cats are interrupting me as usual. Back to what I was saying. After July 4th, they moved in to this home with Gertrude, and their father left to travel the entire East Coast with the carnival. Like I said, she would get $20 a week to take care of them, and apparently they were supposed to be back in November of that year. So, not even 6 months were they supposed to stay with Gertrude. The first few weeks were pretty good. Sylvia would sing along to, like, popular songs on, well, I won't say the radio. They were just records that Stephanie had in her home that she liked. But she would listen to the radio or listen to records with Stephanie. They would sing. They would get along great. Like, it was like a never-ending sleepover. Sylvia offered to participate in housework, help out Gertrude. They all went to Sunday school together. I mean, it was great for the first few weeks. Now, like I said, the Likens were supposed to pay Gertrude $20 a week to take care of the kids. After the first 2 payments, he began getting later and later with paying Gertrude. I don't know why that came out so weird. But the payments were arriving late. Not extremely late by any means. They still got there that week. It was just a few days late. And of course, that could have been the postman's fault, not his. I mean, it was the 50s. Well, it was the 60s now, but you get what I'm saying. Anyway, Gertrude would take her frustration out on the girls, and she began with spanking them with a thick paddle, and she would call them names, like she would call them little bitches and stuff like that, like just, I don't know, like ridiculously taking out her frustration on these kids. On one occasion, barely a month after they had moved in with her, both of the girls were beaten about 15 times on the back with this thick-ass paddle that she had. And the reason that they were beaten so harshly is because Paula, the oldest sister, accused the sisters of eating too much food at an after-church, like, dinner that one of the neighbors had made for the congregation. So apparently now they're eating too much when it wasn't even Gertrude's money that bought this food. Like, I don't know how insane this could get, but Gertrude beat them for that. Now, by the end of August, so once again, not even 2 months later, like a month and a half, Gertrude began to focus all of her abuse and frustration on Sylvia, the oldest daughter. It's been studied on, like, why the hell she was doing this. And apparently, the most likely situation of, like, the behavioral studies that they conducted on Gertrude after she was arrested is that she was jealous of Sylvia's appearance, of her relationship with her sister, how she compared her to her own daughters. It was a whole thing. This abuse, the initial abuse that was inflicted upon Sylvia, it usually happened after school and on the weekends, like clockwork. At first, it started with obviously beating her with the paddle, but they would starve her and force her to eat spoiled leftovers out of the fridge or even out of the trash. And Gertrude would come up with the strangest things to justify her actions to the other kids and to herself out loud. Like, on one occasion, Sylvia was accused of stealing candy that she had actually purchased with her own money, and Gertrude had watched her purchase this candy. Sylvia was also subjected to humiliation in front of the other kids. And apparently, on one occasion, in this first August that she was with Gertrude and her family, she claimed to have a boyfriend in Long Beach who she had met over the summer when her family lived in California with the carnival. Gertrude asked her if she had ever done anything with a boy, and she meant, like, sexual terms, and Sylvia had no idea what she was even talking about. She just said, like, yeah, because she thought she meant, like, gone on dates and stuff like that. She never even kissed a boy at this age. She would pester her with questions like this, just to embarrass her in front of the other kids. She would also make fun of her and tell her that her belly was getting big and she might be pregnant and is going to have a baby with this boyfriend or whatever. Like, it was obviously just to embarrass her in front of the other kids. None of it was true. Sylvia at first thought she was joking, like just having fun with the girls, and Gertrude was not kidding. She was just being a huge bitch for no reason. After all of the talk and the jokes, quote unquote, Gertrude showed Sylvia to the rest of the girls in the house. I guess showed is the correct word. I don't know. They were all together at the dinner table. She picks Sylvia up and makes her stand up and tells the girls that if they do anything with a boy, they will have a baby. And then she kicks Sylvia in the vagina. Now, at the time, Paula was actually pregnant. And she was overweight. And I guess that is where the comments about Sylvia's belly and being pregnant came from. It was just like to deflect the way that she felt about her own daughter onto Sylvia. Now, Paula, who, like I just said, is 3 months pregnant, gets angry at hearing this and begins attacking Sylvia just like her mother. One evening, Gertrude made dinner for Paula, Sylvia, and a neighborhood boy named Randy. The other kids were not home, and these three, Gertrude, her daughter Paula, and the neighborhood boy, force-fed Sylvia a hot dog that was completely overloaded with toppings, like, ridiculous amount. And because they were, like, sitting here shoving it down her throat, she vomited, and they forced her to eat her own vomit. Gertrude was always making comments about how she was a slut or a whore, and in reality she wasn't. So apparently she spread a rumor about herself at school. But she brought in Paula and Stephanie, Gertrude's daughters, as well, and she said that they were all prostitutes and just shit like that to act out at school to get back at what they were doing to her at home. After Stephanie heard the rumor, she questioned Sylvia about it. At this time, Stephanie had never done anything to hurt her. However, after Sylvia admitted to the rumor, Stephanie punched her in the face. However, Sylvia, started crying. She apologized to her. She knew that she shouldn't have dragged her into it, and Stephanie also began to cry. She was not a terrible person. However, Stephanie's boyfriend found out about this. And he brutally attacked Sylvia. He slapped her. He banged her head against the wall. I mean, it was a whole thing. When Gertrude found out about this, she beat Sylvia even more and used a paddle this time, as usual. At one point, Gertrude's daughter Paula beat Sylvia in the face with so much force that she broke her own wrist. And she focused all of this energy on Sylvia's teeth and her eyes, just trying to cause the most harm to her. After she got a cast on her wrist, she then used the cast to beat Sylvia. Gertrude would always, like I said, accuse Sylvia of being a prostitute, of just being a whore, being a slut, awful things that she knew were not true. And poor Jenny, Sylvia's younger sister Jenny. Gertrude would force Jenny to beat her own sister. And if she would not do it, if she refused, then Gertrude would beat her just as hard. I can't imagine being told that I would have to beat up my sister or get beat myself. And I can't imagine being Sylvia and seeing my poor little sister being told this. At that point, I would want her to beat me so that she wouldn't get hurt the way that I had been hurt. And it's so sad. This is such a sad story. And I think now that I'm a mom, stuff like this affects me a lot deeper than it used to. But this is just so sad. Stephanie's boyfriend that I told you about earlier, his name was Coy. Every time that he came over, he would physically and verbally torment Sylvia. He would literally help Gertrude and her children just harm Sylvia for absolutely no reason. Like, he got nothing out of this. And, of course, Gertrude was encouraging this behavior and applauding their behavior. And they're children. They don't know any better. And because of Gertrude, they routinely beat Sylvia. Any chance that they got, they would just attack her. I mean, they would whip her. They would burn her with cigarettes. They severely injured her genitals. Like, they would put cigarettes out on her. I mean, all of this. At one point, Gertrude and all of the kids, including the 2 neighborhood boys that I told you about, they were all in the living room, and they forced Sylvia to strip in the living room, and they forced her to masturbate with a glass Coke bottle. And if she didn't do it, they were basically going to do it themselves, like force her to do it. Gertrude told Sylvia that the reason she had to do this was to prove to her sister Jenny what kind of girl she was. Sylvia stole a gym suit, just like a gym uniform from school, because Gertrude refused to purchase clothes for her to wear to school. After this, Gertrude forbid Sylvia from going back to school. She was supposed to be homeschooled, but of course, Gertrude did not care at all if she was educated or not, so that didn't happen. She was just a prisoner in Gertrude's home. After she admitted to stealing the gym uniform, Gertrude whipped her with a police belt. And then, after preaching about how theft is wrong, as if abuse isn't wrong, she starts talking about how premarital sex is evil and kicks her in the genitals, like as she often did. And Gertrude's daughter, Stephanie, the one I told you, was not a bad person. Stephanie tried to defend Sylvia, telling Gertrude, like, she didn't do anything. Like, she saw her. She did nothing wrong. Because Stephanie defended her, Gertrude burned Sylvia's fingertips with matches and then beat her more. A few days later, Jenny was caught stealing a gym shoe from school. She only needed one because she had the braces and stuff on her other foot, and I guess she had to wear a special shoe. I'm not sure, it didn't really clarify, but I'm assuming that's why. But because Jenny was caught with this, she was also whipped with the police belt. Now, one of the saddest parts of this story is that the first 2 months that they were there, July and August, their parents would return home and visit them, like, seldomly, but they would come. The last time that Lester and Elizabeth, the Likens parents, visited their daughters was in late August, when the abuse was getting really bad. At this time, neither of the girls, I guess, realized how bad it really was, and there were no visible signs of abuse on their bodies. They also did not say anything, and I don't know if it's because Gertrude and their children were there, or if it's just because they didn't think their parents would believe them. But immediately after their parents left, Gertrude turned to Sylvia and she said, "What are you going to do now, Sylvia, now that they're gone?" That was her one chance to escape. In September, well, before I start this, like I said earlier, there's 5 of them. The 2 girls are there. 2 boys are with their parents. They have one older sister named Diana. She's an adult. She lives on her own. In September, the 2 girls see Diana in the same park that they're in. they were with Gertrude's 11-year-old daughter. Her name's Marie. She told Diana that she was hungry, and Diana gave her a sandwich that she had in her bag. Sylvia and Jenny both told her, like, what was going on, like, how they were both being abused, and how that Sylvia specifically was being targeted for this abuse, for stuff that was not her fault. My cats are playing in the window, and they're destroying my blinds, but I'll ignore it for the sake of this episode. Anyways, neither sister told Diana where they were staying. That's, like, the one key piece of information they forgot to mention. But Diana did not really believe them. She thought that they must just be exaggerating, like, it could not be that bad. Completely ignored it. Of course, why wouldn't she? She's an adult, and they seem to always ignore things like this. Not always, but in awful cases like this, I see a lot of people in authority just completely ignore children. And it's so sad. It just adds to the sadness of this case. Now, Sylvia and Jenny did not tell Gertrude that they saw their sister because, why would they tell her that? But Marie, of course, was a blabbermouth, and she told Gertrude about how Diana had seen them there and gave them a sandwich. Gertrude then accused Sylvia of engaging in gluttony, and then her and Paula choked her and bludgeoned her. After this, they made Sylvia get in a scalding hot bath to cleanse her of her sins. And Gertrude, while she was in the bath, grabbed Sylvia's hair and repeatedly banged her head against the bath. Shortly after this, a neighborhood boy named Michael phoned the high school that they went to and anonymously reported that a girl with open sores across her entire body was living in Gertrude's house. Obviously, Sylvia had not been to school for several days at this point because, like I said, she was forbidden to go to school now. So a school nurse visited their house to investigate this claim. Gertrude claimed that Sylvia had ran away from her home the previous week and that she was unaware of her whereabouts. She also said that Sylvia was out of control, and apparently her open sores were a result of her refusal to maintain personal hygiene. So she was blaming this on Sylvia. Gertrude talked so much shit about Sylvia and just made her out to look like a terrible influence and a terrible child that the school made literally no further investigations. Like, they didn't give a shit anymore. They were like, okay, she's just a runaway, she's fine. Gertrude had a set of neighbors, obviously. She lives on the street. Anyways, they were a middle-aged couple named Raymond and Phyllis. At first, they thought that Gertrude was a great caregiver for the Likens sisters because she had so many kids. She seemed very attentive to them. She was a nice lady. Well, this couple visited Gertrude's home while the two girls were there, and on both occasions witnessed Paula, the daughter, physically abusing Sylvia. On both occasions, Sylvia had a black eye, and Paula was, bragging about how she was just beating the shit out of this girl. However, they never reported this to the authorities. I guess maybe they thought it was none of their business, or that it was just, teenage girl drama. I don't know, but they never, ever reported this. On October 1st, Diana, the older sister, found out that they were staying with Gertrude. She visited the property in an attempt to just be able to talk to the girls, be able to set up a way for her to call them, to come visit them, whatever, because, like I said, they were her younger sisters. Gertrude refused to let Diana come in the home. And she told Diana that their parents, Lester and Elizabeth, had told Gertrude not to allow either of the girls to see her. 2 weeks later, Diana saw Jenny close to the home. I guess she was like running errands for Gertrude. She asked about like where Sylvia was, like what's going on. And Jenny told Diana, "I can't tell you or I will get into trouble." Sylvia was often denied permission to use the bathroom. She was basically like just forced to pee on herself, and as a form of punishment for then peeing on herself, she was thrown into the basement and tied up. She would be kept naked, she'd be rarely fed, and she was deprived of water. They would not even like give her water. Sometimes Gertrude would literally tie her to the railing of the basement stairs where her feet could barely touch the ground. After locking Sylvia in the basement, Gertrude would falsely claim to her own kids that Sylvia had been insulting one of them just to try to convince them to help Gertrude, like belittle or attack her. Like just childish bullshit to get them to be on her side. On one occasion, Gertrude held out a knife to Sylvia and told her to fight back, and Sylvia said she didn't know how to fight. I'm sorry. My laptop wants me to update it, and I'm not going to. Anyways, Sylvia was not going to fight Gertrude, and because of this, Gertrude slashed Sylvia's leg. It wasn't a deep wound, but it was just, like, fucking bullshit. Like, why would you do that? These acts of violence were just, like, so commonplace for Gertrude and the kids that the only time it really stopped was for them to go watch their favorite TV show as a family. Like, absolutely normal to them. Like, how twisted that is. Gertrude would often charge the neighborhood kids 5 cents a piece to come and see the abuse that Sylvia had to endure, or even come and help mutilate her. While Gertrude was being held in the basement, or not Gertrude, oh my god, while Sylvia was being held in the basement, Gertrude and her own kids, and some of the neighborhood kids, if they paid 5 cents, would restrain and gag Sylvia, and then they would put her in a bathtub filled with scalding hot water. After this, Gertrude would sometimes literally rub salt into her wounds, like physically and metaphorically, I guess, just to be like, hey, I can do this. On one occasion, Gertrude had her 12-year-old son, John, take urine and feces from the baby, Gertrude's 1-year-old son's diaper, and rub it into Sylvia's mouth. Then Gertrude would give her literally like half a cup of water and told her that's all the water she's getting for the entire day. On October 22nd, we are getting very close to the end of Sylvia's story. On October 22nd, John, the 12-year-old son, tormented Sylvia by offering her a bowl of soup. He didn't give her anything to eat it with. She would have had to eat it with her fingers. And as soon as she attempted to reach for the food, he took the bowl away. And she was extremely malnourished at this point. They were not feeding her in the basement for weeks. After being in the basement for weeks, Gertrude allowed Sylvia to sleep upstairs with her sister on the condition that she learned not to pee on herself, after keeping her in the basement for weeks because she peed on herself once. All because Gertrude refused to let her use the bathroom. That night, Sylvia had her sister Jenny sneak her a glass of water before bed. Because her body was not used to being able to drink water, which is sadder than it even sounds, she did pee on herself. And in the morning, as punishment, Gertrude made Sylvia once again put a empty glass Coke bottle into her vagina. And she had to do it in front of all of the children. All of them, just to embarrass her. After this, Gertrude forced Sylvia back into the basement. Not long after forcing Sylvia into the basement, Gertrude called to Sylvia from the kitchen and told her to come back upstairs. When Sylvia walked into the kitchen, she forced her to strip naked, and then she said to her, "You have branded my daughters. Now I'm going to brand you." Sylvia had, I guess, metaphorically branded her daughters with the rumor that she spread. But Gertrude was not playing around, and she was going to physically brand her. She took a hot needle and carved the words, "I'm a prostitute and proud of it," onto Sylvia's abdomen. Gertrude forced one of the neighborhood kids that were watching her. He was 14-year-old Richard Hobbs. He was 14. She made him finish carving it into her skin, and she took Jenny to a grocery store with her. While Gertrude and Jenny were gone, Richard and the 10-year-old daughter Shirley took Sylvia into the basement, and they both proceeded to use an anchor bolt to burn the letter S between Sylvia's left breast. They were not instructed to do this by Gertrude, but they did it anyway. That is the influence that an evil adult can have on innocent children, because they have been taught that not only is this okay, but it will be rewarded if they do this. One section of the S, or the attempted S, I guess, was backwards, so her burn mark was a 3, not an S. Gertrude then made fun of Sylvia and taunted her by saying that she'll never be able to marry anyone because of the words that are carved on her stomach. Later that day, she's still recovering from these burns. This happened that morning, and this is now the afternoon. Sylvia was forced to show the carving on her body to the neighborhood kids, and Gertrude would laugh and claim that she got the tattoo, as she called it, at a sex party. That night, she was allowed to sleep upstairs again, and she told her sister, "Jenny, I know you don't want me to die, but I'm going to die. I can tell." The next morning, Gertrude woke up Sylvia, and she forced her to write a letter. Gertrude told her exactly what to write, and basically, this letter was intended to make her parents believe she had ran away from Gertrude's home. In the letter, Sylvia had to frame a group of local boys. She didn't have to name anyone. She just had to take the blame away from Gertrude and her kids. But frame these boys for abusing and mutilating her. Gertrude's reason that these boys would have done this to her is because she agreed to engage in sexual relations with them, and then after it happened, this is when they tortured her. After she wrote this, Gertrude told her that her plan was to have John, the 12-year-old boy, and Jenny, Sylvia's sister, blindfold Sylvia and take her to a nearby wooded area, which was known as Jimmy's Forest, and leave her there until she died. After she finished writing the letter, she was taken back to the basement, and she was tied to the stair railing, and they gave her some crackers to eat, except this time Sylvia refused to eat them, telling them to give them to the dog because she didn't want their food. This pissed Gertrude off, and she forced the crackers into Sylvia's mouth, and then her and 12-year-old John beat her. On October 25th, Sylvia attempted to escape from the basement because she knew what was going to happen. She knew that Gertrude and John had this plan to take her to the forest and let her die. She attempted to run towards the front door, but she was so weak that Gertrude caught her before she could even get there. Gertrude gave Sylvia some toast, and she couldn't even eat it because she was so dehydrated. And because she couldn't eat it, Gertrude forced the toast into her mouth and then repeatedly struck her face with a curtain rod until she had hit her so many times that the curtain rod was bending into right angles. Stephanie's boyfriend, Coy, took the curtain rod from Gertrude after she realized it was broken, struck her one more time, and it knocked her out. Then Gertrude dragged Sylvia into the basement again. That evening, Sylvia was desperately attempting to get someone to notice her, to call the authorities, to save her from being abandoned in the woods to die. She screamed for help, and she hit the walls of the basement, just doing anything she could to draw attention of the neighbors. The neighbors on the other side of the Baniszewskis informed the police that she had heard the commotion, and she realized that it was coming from the basement. But suddenly, at around 3 a.m., the noise had stopped. So she decided not to call the police in case it was just it wasn't important. She got in her head, told herself it wasn't important, and she was going to leave it alone. By the morning of October 26th, not even 4 months after she moved in with Gertrude, she was so weak and had been so abused that she couldn't speak and could barely coordinate her movements. Gertrude moved Sylvia from the basement into the kitchen and propped her back up against a wall. She tried to feed her a donut and some milk. And Sylvia, she couldn't even, pick up the glass of milk. She was so weak. This pissed off Gertrude, and she literally, slung her to the floor and then dragged her back down to the basement. After this, Sylvia was completely delirious. She was mumbling, she couldn't make out any words. Paula asked her to recite the alphabet, I guess just to be an asshole, and because, she wasn't talking. Sylvia could only recite the first 4 letters, and she couldn't even, lift herself up off the ground to sit up. Paula verbally threatened her and told her that if she didn't stand up, that she was going to beat her, basically. Sylvia had used the bathroom on herself once again, and she tried to force Sylvia to clean herself up. That afternoon, all of the children, along with Gertrude and a few of the neighborhood kids that had tormented her, all came to the basement to, see what was going on. Sylvia was jerking her arms because that's really all that she could do, and she was trying to point at their faces of all of these people, and she could only recognize a few of them. It's just really hard for me to read this and tell you guys about it. Like, the more that I read about this, the worse it gets. When I decided to speak about this case, I had no idea that it was this bad. While she was in the basement and all of these people around her, Gertrude gave her a rotten pear and told her to eat it. She tried to bite into it, and she was mumbling about how she could feel the looseness in her teeth. Jenny told her, like, don't you remember? Your front tooth was knocked out when you were 7. Like, you can't eat fruits like this. Sylvia had completely forgotten because she was just losing her mind. After this, Jenny left Sylvia in the basement to go do some chores in the neighbor's garden because she was hoping to earn some spending money. Because she used the bathroom on herself, 12-year-old John was attempting to wash her by spraying her with a garden hose with just cold water. This woke her up a little bit, and she tried again to, like, desperately escape the basement, and she fell before she even reached the stairs. Because of this, Gertrude stomped on Sylvia's head. Gertrude ordered Stephanie to come finish cleaning her up since John couldn't do it, and apparently when Stephanie saw her body and the state that she was in, Stephanie fell to the floor crying and was hugging Sylvia's body. Stephanie and one of the neighborhood boys, Richard, the one that helped the other girl, I forgot her fucking name already. Shirley, yeah, the one who helped Shirley brand Sylvia the day before, helped Stephanie give Sylvia a warm, soapy bath and give her some fresh clothes. They then put her on a mattress in one of the spare bedrooms, and Sylvia was muttering to Stephanie that she wished that her dad was there and that Stephanie could take her home. Stephanie turned to her younger sister Shirley, the one who I told you tried to brand her, and was apparently relieved that she was going to be okay. Like, she'd had a bath, she'd been cleaned up, and she seemed to be doing better. And then after this, Stephanie realized that Sylvia was not breathing. She tried to resuscitate her as Gertrude repeatedly shouted to the kids that Sylvia was faking her death and to, like, stop feeling bad for her and stop trying to help her. And that's when she died. I mean, this is one of the saddest things I have ever heard. Immediately upon realizing that she was not breathing, Gertrude picked up a book and started beating Sylvia's body with it, shouting that she was a faker to try to, like, get her to wake up. However, she realized she was not faking, and she panicked and instructed Richard, the 14-year-old boy, to call the police from a payphone that was down the street. When the police got there, Gertrude brought in the officers and showed them Sylvia's body. Her abused and mutilated body. She then handed them the letter that she had forced Sylvia to write yesterday that was false, and claimed that she had been doctoring the child, as she said, for an hour or more before she died. She also said that she applied rubbing alcohol to Sylvia's wounds at an attempt at first aid before she died. That's what she told the police. She then said that Sylvia had earlier run away from her home with several teenage boys, and that afternoon she returned to the house, no shirt on, and had the note in her hand. Paula comes in the room, holding a Bible in her hands, and told everyone in the house, in front of the officers, that Sylvia's death was meant to happen. And then she looked at Jenny and said, "If you want to live with us, Jenny, we'll treat you like our own sister." Before the police got there, Gertrude gave everyone like a script to follow, basically. Jenny told the police exactly what Gertrude told her to. And then she whispered to the officers and said, "You get me out of here and I'll tell you everything." Just what Jenny told them gave them the authority, I guess. After this, they arrested Gertrude, Paula, Stephanie, and John, the 12-year-old boy. All 4 of them. Because of what Jenny told the police. That's what I meant to say. I don't know what I meant about giving them the authority. Whatever. Anyways, this was just within hours of her body being discovered by the police. That same day, Stephanie's boyfriend Coy and the neighborhood boy Richard, who had called the police, were also arrested. All of them were charged with the murder of Sylvia. The 3 oldest Baniszewski children, which I told you, Paula, Stephanie, and John, plus Coy, Stephanie's boyfriend, were all placed in the custody of a juvenile detention center. The younger kids and Richard Hobbs, the neighborhood boy, were detained at the Indianapolis Children's Guardians Home. All of these people were held without bail until their trial. At first, Gertrude denied any involvement in Sylvia's death. Acted like she had no fucking idea what happened. She was completely blind to what happened. But by October 27th, one day later, she confessed to having known that the kids, even her own daughter Paula, singling out her daughter, had physically and emotionally abused her, saying that Paula did most of the damage, and Coy, who was Stephanie's boyfriend, did a lot of the beating. She pinned everything on her daughter, who was only 17, which, no, she was not innocent, but her own mother pinned all of this on her. She then finally admitted that she did force Sylvia to sleep in the basement on 3 occasions when she peed in the bed. That's all she would say at first. Whenever the officers stated to Gertrude that the most likely reason that Sylvia was using the bathroom on herself was because of her mental distress and injury to her kidneys, that is when Gertrude became evasive and did not want to answer questions. Paula completely lacked any remorse. She did not feel guilty whatsoever. She signed a statement and admitted to having repeatedly beaten Sylvia. Told them about how she once broke her wrist because she was beating Sylvia's jaw so hard. And admitted to inflicting other acts of brutality, which she defined as pushing her down the stairs into the basement 2 or 3 times and giving her a black eye. John, the 12-year-old boy, admitted to having spanked Sylvia once and said that most of the time he used his fist to abuse her. He also admitted to having burned Sylvia with matches and added that his mother had burned her with cigarettes. 5 other neighborhood kids, Michael Monroe, Randy Lepper, Darlene McGuire, Judy Duke, and Anna Sisko, were all arrested by October 29th, and they were all charged with causing injury to Sylvia. They were then released into the custody of their parents, but under the condition that they would be witnesses at the upcoming trial. Sylvia's autopsy revealed that she had suffered over 150 separate wounds across her entire body. These injuries included burns, severe bruising, and extensive muscle and nerve damage. Her vaginal cavity was almost swollen shut. Also, upon the autopsy, they noticed that her hymen was still intact, which at this time was used to determine virginity. So this not only did it determine that she was not a prostitute, obviously, but it also completely discredited Gertrude's persistence in the fact that Sylvia was pregnant, which obviously she wasn't, but they discovered all of Sylvia's fingernails were broken backwards, and most of the external layers of her skin had peeled off. Over the last day that she was alive, when she was becoming delirious and weak, she had bitten through her lips, and parts of them were severed from her face because she had bit completely through them. The official cause of Sylvia's death was listed by the coroner as a hematoma, which she received from a severe blow to her right temple. Not only this, but because of the shock her body was in, not only to the damage done physically, but because she was so malnourished. All of these things were contributing factors to her death. I am not going to get into the trial or the testimony because you've heard all of it. I've told you all of it. But I am going to tell you about their sentencing. Gertrude, Paula, and John, along with the neighborhood boys, Richard and Coy, were charged with first-degree murder. Stephanie was not charged, and she was released. She was granted immunity because it was her family, and she waived her immunity and decided she was going to testify against her family. I know it's a lot to ask of a young girl, but I wish that Stephanie could have made a difference. Obviously, I'm not condemning her for not... Lola! Anyways, obviously I'm not condemning her for not helping Sylvia more than she did. I mean, she was probably terrified. I wish it could have been different. I wish Stephanie could have made a difference. Now, Gertrude was originally sentenced to life in prison because first-degree murder, like I said. Paula was not found guilty of first-degree murder, but instead was found guilty of second-degree murder. And then 12-year-old John, Coy, and Richard were all found guilty of manslaughter. Gertrude and Paula were both sentenced to life in prison. And Richard Coy and then 12-year-old John were sentenced to 2 to 21 years. This was a weird sentencing time. Now, in September of 1970, the Indiana Supreme Court reversed the convictions of Gertrude and Paula because, according to the Supreme Court, the judge denied repeatedly submitted motions to separate their trials and to get a change of venue. Because of this, they got a retrial. This time, Paula opted to plead guilty to voluntary manslaughter instead of facing a retrial because she knew she'd probably get the same punishment. This time, she was sentenced to serve a term of between 2 and 20 years. She was released in December of 1972. Gertrude, however, was once again convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. Gertrude was eventually granted parole. Jenny and a lot of the other Likens family members protested her release. I mean, like it was their religion. They tried so hard to keep her in prison. However, she was released on December 4th, 1985. Her release speech was, not only did she wish that Sylvia's death could be undone, but that she wasn't sure what role she had in Sylvia's death because she was on drugs, supposedly. She said, "I never really knew her. I take full responsibility for whatever happened to Sylvia." Well, no shit. That's all I can say. After she was released from prison, she relocated to Iowa, and she did not take full responsibility for Sylvia's death. She repeatedly insisted that she couldn't remember what happened and that she doesn't remember abusing Sylvia. And she tried to blame her actions on the medication that she was taking for asthma medication. However, Gertrude died from lung cancer on June 16th, 1990. That is almost poetic. Poetic justice. Now, when Paula was released in 1972, she went to be a school counselor for 14 years. She changed her last name to hide her history, pretty much. In 2012, she was fired because they discovered her true identity and found out what she did. Her daughter, the one that she was 3 months pregnant with at the beginning of this case, by the way, was adopted. And that's great because she deserves a much, much better life. All of Gertrude's other children were placed in foster homes. And they have all died of natural causes. This is just so sad. Like, I'm completely done talking about this case, but I'm just sitting here in silence thinking about Sylvia. And not only what she went through, but how strong she was mentally to be able to keep going. I mean, she was being forced against her will to stay in the basement, and she could not escape, but she fought back. Maybe not physically, because she was very weak, but just her attitude. She never gave up. Let me know what you guys think about this case. This is kind of a long episode compared to my last few, but I hope you guys have listened to the end, and I'll see you in a couple days. Bye, guys.